on here. So everybody has had an example to, or had a chance to at least work through. Thumbs up if you got through saving something successfully. All right, thumbs stay up if that felt good at some emotional level to have it work. Yeah, okay. I'd like to take a moment then. Let's just go around and hear from everyone, and just if you have a question or like insight, something that you noticed, anything like that, and we'll start over at the far end here.
Oh, no.
Speak into the microphone, please.
Well, just as somebody who has no PHP background at all and just JavaScript, I'm kind of really enjoying this, even though we haven't really touched any of the PHP. So I'm a little bit nervous about diving into that later on, but otherwise, overall enjoying it.
Nice. That is actually really great feedback. And if you stay in the WordPress ecosystem, that's what PHP learning is like. It's just little bits, pretty manageable. So hopefully that will continue on. Very cool.
I think some prerequisites would have been cool too, just having a little bit to take a look at before we come in here. I took a look at some of the stuff and have worked with my own WordPress website a little bit, but yeah, I've learned a lot here. So the single page application stuff is really cool, and like you said, it's just once you get that stuff working and you can update that, it's really
Nice.
great.
Yeah, I think that you're right. That again, my assumption was that most folks watching or here at the workshop would have built a theme or have some of that. So like double applause to tackling this weird alien environment without that background. Let's jump to the back row.
It's really nice, kind of an expedited path that you can follow now to develop your own stuff. I feel like it gets the really basics taken care of.
Cool. So you're okay with the here's a bunch of code, just change these few things and then
And manipulate it
comes into place.
after that based on what you're looking for, yeah.
Cool. How long do you think we would have been here if we coded everything today from scratch?
probably would have gotten through like one of the things.
We'd still be in
3
queuing, I
days.
think, would probably be what happened. How about for you?
I really liked how it's like WordPress, but it's also JavaScript, so it patches together the small bits of knowledge that aren't really workable that I have into like a big picture. Like I can actually do stuff with these like half-finished coding tutorials.
Totally, and I think that you hit the nail on where we are with JavaScript. Like I said, you could build full apps based on the API, but what most people are doing and the biggest wins are just like a little bit here, and it makes it that much slicker, right? And so, awesome, good feedback.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the moldability to all the work that we did today. As someone who hasn't, like, I kind of stopped at getting my my situation kind of figured out, getting things hooked up on the development side. One thing I guess I might appreciate as someone who is kind of a freak for having all of my notes kind of localized on my computer, if it would be possible to take the slides and make them into like a raw README file or something
Totally.
that
Okay.
is a little more like digestible. That's just as I'm kind of tooling around a little bit now.
No, that is brilliant. I'll take all the slides and put them in like a markdown format or something, then you could just read. Nice, awesome, cool,
Thanks a lot.
good feedback. What about for you?
I thought that the responsiveness actually of the code is surprisingly nifty. I thought it was like for some JavaScript code it takes a long time to load. This was actually surprisingly fast. So the code is straightforward to understand, and as long as you've seen it before. But that's the first thing that came to mind was like, oh yeah, this loads fairly fast.
Good, because sometimes the API can be a little slow, so it's good that your initial feeling was responsive. Did most people feel it was pretty quick, you weren't waiting too long, and good, that's what we're looking for. Awesome. Best for last, eh?
As someone who really has thought at different times in my life that WordPress was kind of equivalent to like Blogger.com or Simple, this I'm amazed at the kind of power, and I think as time goes on and I go through the notes, I'll discover more and more that you can do with this. And the second observation, for being a one-day course, I've been impressed by how much interactive you've been with the students in the chat room and stuff, and I've gotten a lot of feedback just from you personally, which I definitely was not expecting. So,
Hoorah! Well, thanks for all coming. I've enjoyed that too. Oh,
And I guess,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I'd add that, you know, I've done a lot of consulting for startups, beyond just working here and here as well. WordPress is how people get ideas off the ground. It's really just the real fast, simple framework that you can pull a bunch of plugins and then mold your application to do something that really hasn't been done before or does what you need it to do for your business. So a lot of people build the version 1
Yeah.
on WordPress, and in our case, we are continuing to use it because it's such a big project to get off of it, even though we have a successful app and we're making a lot of changes to it incoming. But it's just the ease of use to stand up and how many plugins that you can get into it. So if anyone's entrepreneurial, it's just a great, fantastic way to get things off the ground. And another experience, worked for a big corporation, and they were always just shocked at how much their C# or you know, C language based CMSs would cost to do anything in, right? And it's like, yeah, you want to build a website, that's going to be $100,000 or $200,000, and it's like, you know, I keep saying in WordPress I can stand this up in a week by myself.
And I'll
Right.
only charge you 50.
Yeah, I'll only charge you $50,000. So those are just some things to add to that.
Awesome. Very good feedback. Yeah, I like that. And I guarantee that, like, in the next moon, at least half of you will have some conversation where WordPress could be like a solution. And the other person might not even know it. And you don't have to bring it up to them, because then you're also volunteering your help, right? But you'll in the head be like, oh, I bet WordPress could do that pretty easy, right? So, yeah,
So
wanna-
do you feel that focusing on JavaScript and WordPress is future-proofing yourself, at least for the next, 4 months? I mean, is this up and coming, or is it behind the curve?
I think it'll take you 4 months of this to get over the next hump of leaving here and really getting more comfortable. But I mean, I could even see in the next 5 years is safe to say that WordPress is not going to go away. It's still going to gain a few percentages of the web. JavaScript sure ain't going away. And after that time, more and more developers will already have these skills. So like at this point, you really do have a cutting edge. And anyone watching at home, you do too. So this is all valuable. Any other thoughts? This is great feedback. Thank you all. Okay. So we went through this app. This is pretty simple. Now, it's probably worth taking a moment to talk about, is this a good idea, right? Just because we can do something doesn't mean that we necessarily should. So what are the pros and cons to building an app like this? Well, one of the pros is that if you have someone log in, like let's say that we had a login on the front end, because it doesn't make much sense if you were logged out of WordPress to log into the back end where you see all those options and then come into the front end, right? But if you could have them log in here, somebody's just posting really simply, they could do it right there. It's pretty clean. They never have to see the back end. They never even have to know it's WordPress, right? So that's pretty great. On the other hand, how do we edit categories? How do we add a featured image? How do we do the excerpt? All of these things are not included. So to get to that next level, you would have to code way more. Like the amount that we did is this much, but the amount to get to everywhere. So this is where a trade-off I want to suggest is that if it's a simple kind of quick thing, or for that particular client or use case, you're like, oh yeah, let's just hide the whole thing. Let's make it as clean as possible. But if you want to rebuild the entire admin area and all the functionality, this is a bad idea and will take you way longer than you think. Hashtag Calypso has teams of full-time developers, and they still haven't even finished all the features. And I've heard this, I haven't seen the statistics, but a good portion of people who run large sites on WordPress.com still open the traditional editor to do certain things that aren't fully fleshed out in the full React version of it. But all that said, I think one of the best places and biggest wins for doing something like this that we've looked at is, let's say this was a portfolio page, right? And you had your portfolio pieces, and you click on one and you don't need to load a new page. It just pops it open right there. It's all nice and clean. One of the problems you're going to get to, though, if you try to build an entire single-page web app with posts and pages and URLs running JavaScript, you get into some issues because you need to have fallbacks for PHP. So let's say, for example, that when I click on this link, it puts a hashtag up here and then that URL structure, right? Well, then we need to write some extra bit of code, some basic routing code, to figure out what URL we're on and pull it into the page. The other thing is that WordPress already has a page and a template for this. So what a lot of folks who are building real rich themes that work well, they still have some PHP on the back end to handle potentially if something doesn't go through or if the JavaScript isn't there. But then they're building their whole JavaScript app on top of a full theme, right? So the problem again is if you get into different URL structures and somehow the JavaScript isn't loading, you want some fallback. The JavaScript space, and I think Front-End Masters is probably mixed on this depending on the application, but a lot of folks are saying now we don't need fallbacks. Try to run Facebook or your mail or major applications without JavaScript, and it's probably not happening. So you need to make that decision of if it makes sense and how possible is it. And then when you get into routing on top of WordPress, you will eventually hit some weird issues. So I just want to share that and point that out. So all this is to say that you could do a ton with the WordPress REST API, and I just want to point out a few examples here that we're not going to go through, but I just want to show you that they are here for your reference. Okay? So if we come into section 5, we stopped at deleting posts. So I'm not going to go through all the code with you all here. It looks like most people got pretty far along, and at this point you understand how these examples work. So the next thing is the Axios demo. So if you wanted to not use the Backbone client, and one of the examples we never did, notice there's no 5.3, right? 5.3 was supposed to be getting custom endpoints with the Backbone client. It's great for having post pages, everything, but what if we had our simple posts? You need to do some extra code that I wasn't able to quite work out until in order to use Backbone with custom stuff. So the case where you might want to use Axios is if you're running all custom stuff and you don't really want to have to worry about the Backbone client or customizing it or extending it, or maybe you already had JavaScript that was written or your agency or your group is already working with a certain framework or certain tools. This is the Axios demo is the exact same thing you just built, but it's using a different client. It's just using regular AJAX calls instead of the Backbone client. So at some point, if you're going to take this further, go through this example and look at how this works because it will help you make sense of it. The second thing, and we could have started our day with this, is that notice that when we save our code, we have to go back to WordPress and refresh the browser every time, right? How many of you have worked before with some sort of watch or refresh tool that will automatically refresh your code? You're familiar with that? Amazing, right? It's so much simpler. You just save it, pop it open, and it's good. You can do that. So this demo here, what this shows you, is this is a normal theme, but it has, inside of my JS folder, a Webpack configuration. So in this Webpack configuration, we're doing a few things that I just want to point out. We're pulling in browser sync, and what browser sync does is watch your code and hard refresh your browser itself. And if you're running the Webpack developer tool, which we'll look at for our decoupled example, that operates in a completely different space than your WordPress site. So the way we traditionally build JavaScript apps and work with the build tools will not work in WordPress. We have to add this other layer that will automatically refresh our WordPress site itself. So the things in here are down at the bottom. I want to point out this code here. So my site URL is at vagrant.local. So you would change this to jswhatever.dev that you have, and then localhost, you could change it to something else, and you could change the port, something that you're not using. So what happens when you run this is instead of viewing your site at vagrant.local, you would go to localhost:3333, and that would proxy your entire site and control the refreshes. So that's how it takes control of everything for you. If you're going to develop heavy JavaScript stuff inside of WordPress, y'all grab this Webpack config. tweak it for yours, and then it'll just save you all that time of refreshing. I didn't do that with what we were doing just because it's one more thing to add, and we've been covering a lot, but that is there for you. So I would definitely suggest checking that out. And the very last thing is, everybody wants to know how to do a framework, right? How do we do this in React? How do we plug Angular in? How do we plug Vue in? It all works the same way. You basically build whatever it is, you enqueue the files that you need, and it works. So this is a very, very simple theme. It's the exact same thing we've been doing before, and what it's going to do is basically just list out the ability to show a bunch of posts or show a single post, and the actual template code is in the PHP. So notice how I have some Vue code hard-coded right here. Now, is this the best approach? Maybe. It's okay. If you are doing something like this, I would highly suggest leveraging VueCloak. VCloak, if you look into this, because all this code is going to get executed immediately and be on the page before JavaScript kicks in. So VCloak will let you hide it. There are other ways to do that, but if you get deeper into Vue or React or some of these other ones, you're building all your templates with JavaScript, and then you're importing them into the page. So that's kind of the next level, but when you're first starting off with Vue or something, it's simpler to take this approach. So if you're curious about how this works and how you make the API requests with something like Vue, take a look at this code for a second and see if that makes sense. So what that is saying is get the site URL, and you could see that we put this out by using the localized scripts, right? So that's how we get our site URL. And then we're getting this site URL, or this REST endpoint. Sorry, REST endpoint is here. It's computed because you want to take your site URL and then add some things onto it. So if you had different endpoints, you could set them up that way. So we're grabbing our REST endpoint, and then when we get it back, we're setting this posts equal to the new data. And this posts up here will refer to this, our array of posts. So it's just going to get the posts and load them on the page. Really simple stuff. And again, this just shows, and why I was emphasizing taking a look not just at jQuery, but something like Axios or some of the more popular HTTP libraries, is that this is the only component that is different. You could build your whole React or your Vue or your Angular or Backbone app. All you have to do is get those AJAX calls right and then load it into the page. So that should be something that you explore later. How many of you have played around with some sort of framework? Okay. So a good practice might be, if you wanted to play around with it, just try to list 5 posts, and then when you click on a post, show that specific post. Something like that, okay? And you could use this as a reference. And again, this is really the only code that's going to change, and then it just plugs in, or that's going to stay the same, and the rest just plugs into your framework. So that's an example there for you. We won't really go into it further, but when you get there and you're ready for it, it'll make a lot of sense and be helpful. So now we're going to do basically the same thing we did before. We're going to create it decoupled, though. So we lose some things when we move outside of WordPress. So some of the benefits of being inside of WordPress are, we know what the URL of our site is, right? We could get any data and pass it through localized scripts very easily. And we can also do things like authentication very easily. So the fact that all we had to do was pass in a nonce and everything works, or with the Backbone client, you didn't do any authentication. Notice when you saved, you weren't passing any crazy things, you weren't checking cookies, you weren't seeing if they were logged in or had permissions, right? It was all doing it for you. When we step away from WordPress and build it on our own, we've got to do all that on our own. But there are some advantages. One advantage is WordPress runs in a Linux environment. It runs with PHP and it runs with MySQL. you can't run Node well in that environment. It's not built for it. And you can't run WordPress well in a Node environment. So if you wanted to do server-side rendering, like pull the API request in and serve it directly to the page, and this is an approach more people are taking because it's going to get there right away, and you don't have to worry about the fallback. That stuff is already loaded there, right? If you want to leverage server-side coding, the WordPress.com site, the Calypso, it's not running in a normal Linux WordPress hosting environment because it's doing special stuff behind the scenes. So that's something to keep in mind. And without any real good reason, I just think it's kind of fun and cool. And sometimes that's enough reason to explore something until you realize that it's not the best approach. So here's what we're going to do outside of WordPress. Guess what? It's the exact same thing until we get here. So figuring out all the URL requests, it's very easy. And when we talk about modular code, you'll find that most of the code that we wrote in WordPress, we could pull out of WordPress and use decoupled. And likewise, if you build some sort of app decoupled, you could use those React components, you could use those Vue elements, you could use that vanilla JavaScript, pull it right into WordPress, and it should work. And then we just use this for the rest. So what I'll do is I'll show you the demo, and then we'll work through the first part together again, and then I'll give you some time to try to get through the rest, and then we'll go back and talk about some bits and pieces of it. Particularly, I want to stop before we get to authentication and do that one together because it is leveraging some tools you may or may not be familiar with. But let me just show you the setup for these. So what I'm going to do is, because we're outside of WordPress, these examples are not themes and they're not plugins, so we don't have to copy them into WordPress. We can run them wherever we want, and they're all leveraging Webpack behind the scenes so that we could just launch up a server directly. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to drag this down into my editor. Man, it's really hard to use your computer when drag and drop doesn't work. Things we take for granted. Okay. Okay. So let me come down to the final example, deleting posts completed. I'm going to open up my command line and I'm going to cd into 6.6. Okay. And once I'm in here, because you notice there's no node modules folder, so the first thing you'll have to do is run npm install. Oop, that's not going to work. Hold on. Okay. And that's going to pull down all your files. So you'll have to do this for every one, so it may take a few seconds. It may just be faster to copy and paste, but you'll notice that the requirements in the first file are very small, and then by the time we get to the end, not the dstore package. Notice now, not only do we have Axios, but we have a form URL encoder, whatever that is, and a JS cookie, and some more stuff in our thing. So you can't copy all the files directly. The other thing that I'll mention, especially for those that are watching and saw that I changed some of the repo, is that when we get into saving posts, because you can't take the entire WordPress editor and pass it via a JSON string and have all that code work, I look forward to the days when internet pipes work that way. But we can't. So when we get into our saving posts, notice that in my distribution folder, I have TinyMCE here, and in my index.html, scroll with me now. I'm just doing a hard link to it. So maybe not the best approach ever, and you could definitely get the slimmed down version, although this is the minified version. So again, not the best approach ever, but this is how we're doing it. If you downloaded the code and you come into one of the later examples, like let's say you come into editing posts, and you don't see inside your distribution folder the Teeny MCE folder, copy and paste it from one of the previous examples, okay? So if you come into distribution for like editing posts or deleting posts and you don't see this Teeny MCE folder, you've got to copy it. But I removed it just to save on speed, okay? So now everything should be pulled in at this point. Cool, let's run npm start. I'll just show you again the package. Okay, so our scripts in our JSON file, our package JSON, we have start, which is going to run Webpack server on HTTPS. We need HTTPS. You should never be doing authentication with your site not on SSL and your app on SSL. So our WordPress site has got to be SSL, and whatever app we're building is SSL. Otherwise, the data that we're sending is completely insecure, and we do not want to be sending username and passwords over the wild, wild web, right? So that's something to point out. And then finally, when you're ready to build for production, that option is there as well. So I could run npm start. This will boot up my server, and it's going to tell me that this is going to be running on HTTPS. Just give it a second here. Okay, so it's compiled and running. Now I can come into my browser and localhost, I think it's at 3000. Check it out. Looks familiar, right? This is not running on WordPress, necessarily the server. So this could go straight up on any server. It doesn't have to be connected to the WordPress site. We click on something, we see the full post. Notice that this is just an excerpt, and then there will be more when you go into the page. So containing that single page view. And then we also have the ability to log into our site. And now we see, oh, I didn't copy over Teeny MCE, so it broke. Let me do that real quick. So grab my Teeny MCE folder and into deleted post completed.
Hey Zach, could you tuck the handkerchief in a little bit? It's kind of rubbing on the mic.
Ah, thank you. Yep. And I'm just going to check, like I said, that in my index file, it's all linked up properly. That link should still be there. Okay, yeah, so that's there. Let's see. So copied over, almost done. I will say, when I was playing around with this, there are a number of different editors. So this is one of the problems when you move decoupled and you want to let people edit. There's a few different major ones out there. Some of them work better with some frameworks. Some of them work better than others. But because WordPress is already using Teeny MCE, and it is kind of tricky sometimes to set up and work with, that was part of the reason I did that here. But this is taking a really long time to copy over. Okay, I'll come up and demo this on again. I'm going to let you get started, but basically what you should see is the exact same thing we had before, where you'll see the ability to edit posts and delete them. Here we go. Okay. Let's log out and start this over. Okay, so we've got our posts. We can go ahead and log in. And now we could see we have this action, new posty. Heyo, more. Save it. We get the same message as before. The form clears. This time we don't have a toggle one. It was just one more thing to add, and I figured if you know the JavaScript to toggle something, that's not too bad. But now we could click on edit. It'll pop it up into the edit field. We could edit it. We could also delete it. And unlike our last app, not only can we edit and add stuff, but we can actually click into a specific page as well and view that extra data. So that wasn't in our standalone one. It looks like something went wrong here with that content being cleared. Should be. Okay. So this is what we're after. And the benefits of being able to do this is that you can now basically do whatever you need and work through the authentication. You could have them editing posts, deleting it, and we're not tied to WordPress at all except via the API. So section 6, again, that's how we're going to run through it. What I'd like you to do is take a stab at doing list posts and doing single posts on your own, and then we'll come back for authentication together because there's some more things I have to talk about there that are going to go on. Okay? So remember those steps. You've got to run npm install, you've got to run npm start, and then you could start coding everything out at HTTPS localhost 3000. Okay? Any questions before we jump into that? Okay?
The login
Oh, yeah.
to get in is just your own personal, or is it just a generic admin?
It is the exact same user information you had before. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So we'll put a good 10 minutes on the clock and check back in after that. John, would you mind freezing the screen for me for a moment, por favor?
There you go.
Thanks.